On today's episode of The Next, our guest is Jeremy Crane. Jeremy, I've known a long time. He's currently the head of product at Ankored, and prior to that, he was head of product at Jasper. He was chief product officer at the Wanderlust Group. He was VP of product at HubSpot. You get the point. He's a longtime VP of product, and he also happened to be a course creator on Reforge, Brian Balfour's company, another recent guest on the show. And that course was around mastering AI, rethinking how you build products in an AI era where the constraints and possibilities have radically shifted. Now, I wanted to bring Jeremy on for a few reasons. Selfishly, as a longtime head of product, people fancy me a product-focused founder, but I have to say, especially as it relates to scaling teams and processes, I still feel a little out of my element. So I wanted to learn just what being a product leader entails and what the typical process looks like. And I also wanted to better understand how AI is evolving that process and what are the elements that remain and what are the elements that are shifting, and if they're shifting, how they're shifting. We get into all of that and more. I hope you enjoy it. But before we get started, I'm Jason Jacobs, and this is The Next. It's not really a show, it's more of a learning journey to explore how founders can build ambitious companies while being present for family and not compromising flexibility and control, and also how emerging AI tools can assist with that. Each week, we bring on guests who are at the tip of the spear on redefining how ambitious companies get built. And selfishly, the goal is for this to help me better understand how to do that myself while bringing all of you along for the ride. Not sure where this is going to go, but it's going to be fun. Okay, Jeremy Crane, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason. Good to chat.
Good to chat with you. Yeah, the nice thing about this podcast is it's just a good excuse to catch up with people that I should be catching up with anyways. And if it happens to add value for anyone else, then great. But even if it doesn't, I get to catch up with you, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, we caught up briefly, but it's been a while. We first started chatting back in your Runkeeper days, so that was a long time ago now.
Yeah, it's crazy. It was probably like 2009 or 2010, which somehow was like 15, 16 years ago.
Yep. You were a super small team at the time when I first started chatting with you. So I think you had 6 people on a team or something.
Yeah. Oh man, I remember it well. I thought it'd be interesting to have you on. You've been part of a number of scaling startups in product leadership roles, and you've also been mucking around with some of these AI tools, and you even taught a course or two on it, right?
I did. Yeah, I started. So it was interesting. I scratched an itch of my own around building an application. I wanted to see what I could build with using some of the AI tools that were out there. I was seeing how effective it was at coding and decided to go build my own stuff. Built 3 or 4 different things, prototypes, started playing with this, started to realize how powerful it was over the past year, and then built a little process that worked really well to get really good results from the coding, and reached out to Brian Balfour at Reforge and mentioned it. He was psyched. That sounded like a good thing. Connect me with them. Before you do it, I put together a course and helped a bunch of people build some mobile apps for prototypes and things like that. Yeah, it was super fun.
Yeah. One thing that I'm curious to just understand better is, I've spent some time on the show looking at these no-code tools and how it enables non-technical people to code stuff, but also how these tools can give leverage to technical people to make their coding efforts go further. Stuff like refactoring, or if you give it clear direction to go and build out a module or things like that. But I haven't spent as much time with product people, and it seems like some say that the product management function might even be under threat. So as a longtime product leader and someone that's been mucking around with these tools, how are you thinking about how the product function is changing and what the implications of these tools might be as they continue to get more advanced and wider spread?
Yeah, it's a good one. So I would say I both agree and disagree, or I don't know what the term is. I think the role is changing, right? I think the role is going to change drastically over the next couple of years, and I think it's going to happen really quickly. On the one hand, and I'm not the first person to say this by any means, I don't think this is novel, but what I agree with that has been said out there by folks, and that what I'm seeing is, if you are a product manager that is essentially more of a project manager, in truth, right? You are pushing priorities around a board and writing up tickets and handing work to engineers, and they're just programming and executing on the tasks. And yeah, that role is probably going to go away, right? That's not a function that we will need anymore. What's super interesting is if you are somebody who is more strategic about your thinking, if you think of your role as being an enabler for the team to understand the end customer and the end user and to navigate the journey of the product and the business and that connection, I think you will absolutely have a role, because you're going to play a really critical component within that team. The thing that's really interesting that I also see happening for smaller startups and through mid-stage that is super powerful is the three primary roles that we've had traditionally on a product development team, are all collapsing, right? So we're seeing product design, engineering, and product management start to move together, and engineers can do more product management. Designers can do more product management. Product managers can do more design work and engineer, and all three of those combinations, it's starting to collapse. And so what I think is super interesting is folks that are out there that are product leaders that have a product mindset. And by product mindset, I mean, you think about basically value and viability, which is the core tenet there, which comes, I can't remember the guy, that's again, stealing that from other folks, like all good things. If that's what you think about, and now you have the ability to execute on those, right? If you still think of your role as like pushing projects through, that's what's going to get really exciting, because as an early stage product leader, you can do design work with these tools that's exceptional, right? And bring your ideas to life in a way that really is really effective. You can start to code prototypes. You can get prototypes out there. You don't have to burn your expensive engineering resources. Doesn't mean you don't need engineering later in the process to build really effective, secure, scalable software, but you can actually execute much earlier on in the ideas and bring those ideas to life in a way that's functional, right? You don't have to do hacky clickable prototypes in Figma and other tools like that anymore. You just build a prototype. Just build the thing that you want to envision, show it to a real engineer, and have them go and test it, right? Bring that to life. One of the things you mentioned that I think on the other roles is thinking about that collapse that I think is super interesting. I think these tools are absolutely changing the perspective, right? So product managers can build prototypes, as you mentioned, and you've got this whole like vibe coding thing where, that I hate the term, but it seems to have been adopted now. So whatever, can't fight the masses. We'll go with it. You mentioned on the engineering side, I think one of the really interesting things is how engineering is going to change as well, and is changing. And these are really powerful tools to accelerate engineering productivity and move from a world where an engineer can start to think about product strategy and how it gets executed in the product, and not have to worry about burning all of their calories and time on typing. So we're going to move to a world, I would say, I'll make a bold statement, within the next 5 years, I think very little actual programming will be done by human fingers, right? It'll be orchestrated by very smart developers that will level up and start to think about things at a much more scalable level. They'll be doing real engineering. They just won't be writing the code, because why would you? It's so much more effective to have the machine do it. So the challenge will be for a lot of people, and the wave that we're going through, same thing that's happening on the product management side, will be, you have to be the type of engineer that wants to lean into that, right? And you can't look at this as a threat. You have to see this as an opportunity and a tool for you to level up and be better. And I'm definitely seeing that bifurcation happen both in product management, in engineering, and some people leaning in and saying, oh my God, this is amazing. And others saying, no, it's not going to work. You'll always need somebody doing this or that and that kind of thing.
Now, you've worked in a number of different organizations and seen a number of different product processes. With the benefit of hindsight, is there a particular process that you have the strongest conviction in, or can it work a number of different ways, or I guess flipped around, can it not work a number of different ways?
Yeah. So I guess, you mean on just generalized product development processes?
Yeah, we'll get into how AI is changing it, but first I just want the context of just like historically, is there an objective right or wrong, or are there many different ways to make it work that vary greatly from team to team, from founder to founder, et cetera?
Yeah. I think it 100% it varies depending on the team, depending on the organization, depending on the customers, depending on the product and the space. I do not think there is one right way. I think there is a right way for every company in their given space and their given customers, right? And your goal as an early stage startup and company that's building is to find that right way. And by definition, find all the wrong ways, right? You're going to find the wrong ways of doing that process. And so simply copying another company that has done it in an amazing way and you've seen success and taking their process and just blindly copying it is generally not going to work in terms of product development. Every company I've worked at has had drastically different product development processes, and some of them have really struggled and those companies frankly struggled, and others have had success in the way that they built their own process. I think HubSpot was one of the ones that for me was truly philosophically shaping for me, because one of the things I saw at HubSpot was this evolution of the product development process. What we did early on didn't last as we scaled the company, as we got bigger and as things changed and as our team changed and grew, it just didn't translate. And we actually had to get really good at saying, okay, what are the philosophical tenets we're going to hold on to? And what are the like little process things that we're going to change because we can't actually execute on that philosophical tenet anymore because our process is getting in our way. I think and so the philosophy at the core of all of it is what matters more than anything. And this is for a lot of folks is very bread and butter now, but you got to find ways to get the customer problems, challenges, and experiences as close to the builders as possible. How do you get that primary information from here to there? Now, depending on your organization, that you may need steps in that process based on the people you have in your organization, the types of customers, the way you can talk to them. We had a great opportunity in the HubSpot world where we could expose engineers to customers. We would get them on meetings with customers. That became a foundational part of what we did. And it was really valuable to have that primary experience. And the product management role was not a gatekeeper of information. It was a manager of exposure to information in a lot of ways with things. I've worked in a couple of enterprise type environments where that is much harder. It's much harder to get engineers on the phone with that customer. So you have to figure out how do we capture that information as primary as possible and get it in front of engineers, get it in front of the builders, the people who are actually building. Those are the primary aspects of what you need there. So you're solving and understanding the fundamental problem so you can think big picture, right? And you can think about how all these pieces fit together and how you're going to actually change the experience for your end users. That's one big tenet. The other one that I've carried throughout, regardless of the company, that's more of a philosophy, is just that idea of paying attention to your competitors, but not really studying them, watching them, copying them. Just be aware look for ideas, right? Be aware of what they're doing for interesting ideas and things, but not really worrying about what they're doing, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're paying attention to the customers and you're really focusing on that more than anything, you're going to build something, and you're smart, right? You have smart people on the team that know how to solve problems and things like that. You're going to build something just as good, if not better, than the next company out there that isn't doing that, maybe, right? So those are like the core, but the process is very different depending on the company, and you have to figure out what it is, what your process is.
In terms of keeping all the trains running, how do you think about the balance between too process heavy and not enough process?
Yeah. So I tend to be this is something that I've become aware of or been aware of for a while. I'm a little process allergic. I tend to not like rigid structures. And I think that has taught me that I am, for the most part, a relatively early stage guy because of that.
What does that mean? When does it graduate from being early stage in your mind?
Yeah. I think for me, it often is about the number of opinions that are involved in the process and the number of bodies that are involved in the process of building, which generally aligns to some extent to revenue, but we're seeing all that change with the scale of some of these AI companies where you've got, I won't get into the exact numbers, but tens of millions of dollars was being generated by a team in the single digits at Jasper in early days. It's crazy talk, right? So those things change, but it's really about how many people are in the process and how many teams are involved. I would say as we got to a more divisional structure at HubSpot, for instance, where we had large groups of engineers, we had something like 300 engineers and in product development in general, engineers, product managers, designers in that product development organization towards the tail end of my time there some process was needed, right? The engine starts to shake, and that's probably the biggest signal is when you're not able to effectively deploy solutions and product improvements to your customers at a pace that feels like you're staying ahead and basically making progress, then you inevitably have to have some process in place. And that's, for me personally, that's the time when I'm like, I'm not the best guy for this anymore. And that was the time I ended up leaving HubSpot, as they were 2 years post IPO and we had a pretty big team and we're still growing like crazy. And it was great people and great product and all that. Yeah. So that's how I would say I've seen other flavors of this at other companies. When I was at Wanderlust Group time there for about 4 years, we had some periods where we tried to force some process in place too early. And it was, in my opinion, pretty ineffective, right? It stagnated a lot of what we did because we felt like we had to push all the buttons on all the things instead of just going and talking to the customer and attacking the next thing on the pile that was most important based on what we were seeing right now and the general opinion in the room, right? We were never that big of a team, but that we felt like, oh, we need to get better. This feels messy. It feels messy and it feels like we're all over the place. We need to add some structure and some process. And I think that was a little bit of a mistake. It didn't kill us, but definitely slowed things down. And the beauty of the chaos early on is some magic can come out of that.
And I think similarly, how do you think about validating and spending time with customers, as you said before, getting engineers, time with customers and stuff, with what people like Steve Jobs have said about how, if you listen to, or Henry Ford, if I listen to my customers, I'd build faster horses. Or if I listen to what the people wanted, they would want faster horses. They couldn't imagine a car. And Steve Jobs talked about how, like, give the customers what they need, not what they think they want. Like, how do you reconcile that kind of feedback with the importance of learning from customers firsthand? Like, when do you listen and when does the customer not know best?
Yeah. So generally my take is you don't listen when the customer tells you what to build. That's like the simplified version of my take. When customer says, you should add this feature, you should add this button, I wish your product did this. That's when you say, oh, that's great. Now you ask the question that gets you to what you really want. I think the Henry Ford quote gets misused a lot. And I guess it gets construed as, if I didn't understand customer, like, you don't need to understand your customer. That's not what Henry Ford said at all. Henry Ford understood people and customers and transportation, what we really needed to be able to accomplish. He didn't ask them what feature to build, right? That's his point. And so when customer tells me I need to build this, my first question is, oh, that's super cool idea. Help me understand why you want to do that, what you're trying to accomplish. Tell me, like, what are you hitting right now that's pausing this? Why is that valuable to you? Tell me about the greater process that you're involved with that you're trying to attack here so that I can really understand it. Not saying no. I'm not saying no to your feature and functionality. What I want to do is maybe there's something I'm trying to get at, something better, something bigger, something more cohesive. At the end of the day, the thing they suggested might be great, right? It might be something that you do go and build, but if you don't understand the why behind it, you're going to end up with really messy, it's inevitable, because I've done this, right? I have been the victim. I have done this and seen this firsthand in my experience doing exactly this, building exactly what the customer said and adding a bunch of buttons and knobs and dials and features and functionality in your product, and it becomes essentially unusable. And that's the challenge of doing that versus holistically understanding the problem and figuring out who you want to listen to, who you don't want to listen to, and what the why is. And if you get to that why, that's the goal, right?
I've been poking around because I wanted to just get a sense of what rhythm you've fallen into after being through this rodeo a number of times. If you look forward, how much do you think about how product leaders have been trained will still be relevant as we enter this new world? Is it just about incrementing and evolving the fundamentals, or is it almost better to start with a clean slate and beginner's mind and completely rethink how we structure teams, what processes we run? Will the fundamentals still hold true?
I think some of them will. So I think what's interesting to me is that piece that we just talked about. If you're the type of person who digs for the why, digs for an understanding of the problem space and where to apply your calories, and thinks about, okay, how should we create value and what is viable to create? If that's how you think about the world and how you attack the problems, now you are a weapon to wield these new tools, right? You don't care about execution. You don't care about how we get it done, what process we apply, right? And yes, all of those processes are going to change. I have no idea what the future product team looks like, but I do know that the smartest leaders will be thinking about how do we apply what's available to us as tools to attack the problem in the right way, and how do we leverage these things to think about how we might even solve these problems. So I think to an even greater extent, we will get to a world where we won't actually be solution it. Like one of the worst things I think you can do as a product manager, for instance, right to date, right now, is say, here's the solution, here's exactly what we need to build, hand that to your development team and tell them to go build it. And the problem with that is because you might not necessarily be understanding that core why and that problem, right? Now we're moving into a world with AI and all these tools where maybe we don't even have to think about what the best solution is, because as long as we pick the right problems to solve, the tools are going to come up with the best solution for us, right? So the value isn't coming up with the solution. The value is in that problem is the right problem to solve that will produce value and drive business value for us as a company, as a team, as a goal, and for customers in general. So that's like that key important piece that, like, if you're a really good product leader right now, you focus on that more than anything, and then you leverage your engineering team to come up with that solution and execute. Now you're going to be able to do that at a much bigger scale by applying an AI to think about, okay, how should we solve this problem best? And even beyond just the code execution, right? So one of the things I spend a lot of time doing now is I have conversations like all the time, all day with Claude, getting feedback on problems we have and how we might approach it, and like just digging and ideating on what are some solutions here. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's very cookie cutter and you're like, this is crap, I got to go think about this on my own. But sometimes you get really novel approaches to these things, right? And that's just going to continue to accelerate.
So what's an example of something you might talk to Claude about and sort through together?
Yeah. So let me think through it. So it's often pretty nuanced to the product problem. Trying to think of a specific example. So here's one. We've been thinking about, there's a set of like very secure data that we collect. I'm going to try to anonymize this a little bit just so that we don't get into too many of the details with the current company. there's some very secure data that we collect from individuals right now that we need to on behalf of what we're doing and for the core to our business. And it's collected and stored and not readily available to, you can't generate value from it right now. It's just collected to check the box. And that's problematic because at the end of the day, this is actually really useful data for, I'll just say what we do is keep kids safe, right? This is useful data. If we can expose it, make it available and make it readily accessible, we could keep kids a lot safer in youth sports, right? Because that's what we focus on is youth sport compliance. But it's just collected and stored in these piles of data that's inaccessible and hard to use. And so one of the things I actually engaged with a few months ago with Claude to dig into is like, how can I think about exposing, like, how do I extract value from this data with AI? What are the things I need to be thinking about because this is sensitive, secure data? Like, how do I need to think about like how I would engage with AI? How do I leverage these models? I can't expose this data publicly. I can't pass this stuff to ChatGPT or Claude, just the foundation open APIs. And so I wanted to think through all of the challenge of that and also think about the product experience that I might leverage. And so I had a lot of back and forth with is thinking about, okay, how do I simplify this down so coaches can get some real value out of this when they want, and administrators to know what's going on, and how do the underpinnings of this have to work? What are some key components and requirements that I need to have in this system, and what's available to me now? And then also like one of the things that I did is I use tools in tandem like Perplexity to do search alongside Claude. Now Claude has web enabled as well. So I actually use both and dig into that. But hopefully that's like enough of an example without going into too many of the like underpinning details.
Do you have a set way that you go about building intuition for the customers that you're building for? And is that evolving as the tool sets under your feet continue to evolve?
Yes. I'll go so far as to say it's a set way. I have some approaches, which is generally taking every opportunity I can to listen to customers and engage with them, especially early on. When I'm like right now, I'm pretty early on in the journey at Ankored, a few months in. I spend as much time as I can on some sales calls so I can hear the problem. Sales calls are really valuable and cool because salespeople tend to be good at digging into the problems that are exposed. And then you'll hear about those problems more firsthand before they've been tainted by a product experience and before they've actually adopted. And so that is gold right there, right? So I love hearing from those prospects. Spend a bunch of time with customer success and support so I can understand I have a weekly meeting with customer success, and we go through support and we go through what's working, what are the needs, what are the top, I force some prioritization from them. What are the biggest challenges they're facing right now? Is it different or the same as last week? Those are general things that I just do everywhere. It's a bunch of conversations with the folks that have the most primary connection to the customer. The things that are changing and that I've layered in is you can actually have conversations with the tools that are out there, whether it's Claude or Perplexity or ChatGPT, and leveraging even for the deep research side of things to have conversations with those tools as if they are customers. And so it's not exactly the same as talking to a customer and hearing that, but what's interesting about it is you are getting a flavor across a cross-section of customers if you know how to work with them and use good prompts to set them up and say, here's how I want you to think about the world, and this is what's important to me. Tell me about the challenges you're experiencing in this space. It's quite good at exposing a bunch of information and challenges that might be faced, and it gives you a starting point to go and then take that to real customers and acid test that. Hey, is this a real problem? Do you have this challenge? And what I'm finding is it's as the models get better and the tools get better, it's more often than not, you're having that conversation with the customer that, yes, that's our number one problem, right? And so you can get that stuff quicker and faster and at scale.
And as the models are improving so quickly, does it feel a little bit like building a house on a beach that you know is becoming a victim to accelerating erosion?
Yeah. So I haven't come up with a good name for it. I've talked to other folks. I'm sure there's like an actual term for this, but it's like a rocket. I call this a rocket ship problem, which is it's really hard to navigate right now because, and what I describe that is, and the analogy is, I could build the absolute best rocket I could ever imagine with the latest and greatest technology today, and I could launch it for Mars, right? We're going to go to Mars on this rocket. I'm going to send it to Mars. And then that's going to get there and say, I'm going to challenge my math in 2 months or whatever it takes to get to Mars, right? Now, tomorrow, I'm going to have some technology that's available to me that I could now launch that rocket tomorrow and it will get there in a month and 20 days. And the day after that, it will get there in a month. So it's like, when do you punt and say, I'm going to wait? Because like the thing that you could do to do something amazing, and we've always had this. We've always had this in technology, but it's the time frame of this acceleration is getting so compressed that I do think it's really hard. Like this is an ongoing challenge.
You know what it reminds me of, though, is that one of the things, so I had a Tesla and now I drive a Rivian, but one of the cool things is that you get the car, but then after you have the car keeps getting better under your feet because of software updates. So it's like, how do you architect your system, to use that Mars analogy, in a way that once you leave for Mars, it can continue to get better once it's in flight?
Yeah. And I think that's going to be the answer, right? I think we're going to see, and there's already some of these companies out there that are starting to crop up to basically become the middle layer that will solve some of these problems for software teams that are dealing with this challenge. It's actually something that we spent a bunch of time. It's one of the best things that I think Jasper thought about during my time there. And that was, we built that middle layer to allow you to manage multiple models across the platform and to be able to essentially, to begin with, it was like manual switching. You could swap in a model and it would take 10 minutes to swap in a new model and update it. And everything else would just work. Eventually it got to the point before I was leaving where it was an automated process where based on the prompts that were coming in from users, we could on the fly pass that to different models in the system. And we would basically just enable them in this, and we called it this Jasper AI engine. But the idea is this middle layer architecture that will allow us to abstract away from that. And as software developers, product developers, basically just point at that middle layer and let it give you the best results possible. At the end of the day, it's still the challenge we face with these tools is that what is truly possible is also changing. So it's not just that we are getting better at solving the known problems. It's that our scope of the problems we can actually attack is completely changing every day. Like I just read this article today, which is mind-blowing in a completely different space, that OpenAI has some models now that are actually getting to the point where it's able to do cross-discipline scientific comparison to come up with novel ideas for scientific solutions that no human would ever really think of, because you wouldn't think about like looking at biochemistry and comparing that to electronics or something. Like you just don't have, most humans don't have that expertise in one head, so they don't think that way. That's crazy, like expansion of problems that now become viable for us chasing in terms of solutions.
When you think of the term AI first as a company, is that just like a buzzword, or does it actually mean something profound in terms of how companies get started and scaled?
Yeah, it's certainly a buzzword, but I actually think it has meaning, right? I think it's, in a lot of cases, it gets thrown around and folks will say we're an AI first company and really they aren't. But there are a bunch of companies out there that I think are truly AI first and are thinking about it. And for me, what it means is it's exactly going back to what we just talked about, which is in an AI first mindset, the set of problems and the way you would solve those problems is completely different than it was 5 years ago. The world of possible is so expanded at this point that it's just completely different. And so the biggest change I would say is if you are an AI first company and mindset as a software product team, you think in terms of goals, not in terms of actions and tasks, right? So if you build in the old way of building software, Dharmesh talked a bunch about this early days, and I think it's 100%. In the old mode of software, you built software that executed tasks. Those tasks could be extremely complicated. They could be all press a button, it does a thing. The thing might be hugely complicated under the covers, but it is executing a task, a dumb task. Now we move to a world where we are pointing the software at a goal, and we're saying, achieve that goal. Here's a bunch of tools. Here's a bunch of capabilities. Knock yourself out. We don't care how you do it. That's crazy. And so that mindset of being goal-oriented and thinking, if I'm building a CRM, what is the goal here? I want to expose data to the right people at the right time, have it at their fingertips, and I don't want to have to think about how I collect that data, and I don't want to have to I want it to just work, and I want all that stuff to be there with me. I know for a fact that's how Peachy and Christopher over at AI are thinking about the world, and that's an AI first perspective on the world, right? Is you're thinking about the end goal. You're not thinking about how we execute tasks to get there, and then you're building your software to enable that goal-oriented approach.
So I'm sure you hear from some of your friends who are maybe they're in A round or B round or C round scaling venture-backed companies. They've been around for some number of years. They've been executing since before any of this stuff existed, at least not in the ways that it is starting to take shape and be adopted now. And they've got a bit of a dilemma because they've got all their set ways of doing things and they're on a treadmill just trying to keep up with that and always feeling behind. They see how quickly the world is changing. They hear all these stories of how AI is impacting what's possible in such profound ways, but they don't know where to start and they're already booked with all the things that are already on their plate. What advice do you have for people that are in that situation? Because I feel like there's a lot of them.
I would 100% agree. And frankly, I'm struggling with that myself, right? I look at the plate of things. We're a relatively young startup company ourselves, and I look at the pile of things that we have to do and that we want to accomplish and that we know will add value and that we're cranky through, and it's just like stuff we need to do. And that consumes all of our time. And it's really hard to carve out that time to think differently and go after that other stuff. I'm beating the drum every day, as you can imagine, probably getting annoying to a lot of the folks here, and we'll get better at it. But I think it's tough. I do think there are folks out there that are leaning into it. And I actually don't, it's like even folks that have been at it for a long 10 years on their journey as a startup. I just had a conversation with a friend who's a founder and CEO, was an advisor at a past company, and he's doing a bunch of he's completely rethinking his product now and his approach to the world, because he thinks he recognizes this is all going to change and I need to rethink it. And then even at a tactical and process level, he sat down and started writing software himself using these tools that are available to build those prototypes as the CEO and founder of a company that's been around now for 10 plus years. It has a good amount of customers and millions of dollars of revenue, and they're well established. That's the mindset you have to find ways to bring into the company. I don't really have a great answer to that yet because I'm still fighting with it myself to find that, to carve out that time and figure out how to make that happen. I think the answer is you have to find the ways. I think the one thing that has been powerful for me personally has been having a leader in the company who gets it, which is, we have that now, and is worried about that change. And getting everybody in the company using the tools that are out there now, really encouraging, making it easy. Like, we have a budget, every employee has a paid subscription to Perplexity and Claude or ChatGPT. Every developer has either Cursor or GitHub Copilot or various other tools that we're using for that. We'll pay for all that, right? No questions asked. We want the thing. Come, tell us how we use it, done. Because if you use those tools, it changes the way you think about the world and what's possible. And then that trickles into, oh, hey, what if our product actually approached this problem that way? And we're starting to see inklings of that a couple months in here. So hopefully if I am successful, a year from now, we'll be in a completely different place.
You mentioned before that in 5 years, you weren't sure if any code would be written by humans. If any of your kids were interested in pursuing a software engineering path, how would you feel about that, given that? And what do you think the future is of the software engineering path, if your hypothesis is true?
Yeah. So I would say that it's what we are going to see is a bifurcation of the discipline. And what's interesting about software engineering, unlike almost every engineering discipline I could think of, I thought really hard about this. It's the only one where the engineer, the person who concepts the ideas and thinks about how to solve those problems, actually does the building, actually does the programming, right? So programming is very different from software engineering, right? Like the architect doesn't build the building. The civil engineer doesn't build the bridge, right? That's not how engineering typically works in every other discipline that we have out there. I think software engineering is going to move to that world as well.
And by the way, I wonder how many robots are going to be building the buildings or the bridges. That's another, yeah.
Yes, that's a whole other discipline. All of those, and I think that's right. Like, I think there's a world, if we want to get really big here, humanity needs to move to a world of orchestration of these roles. I think, and we can have lots of questions about what that means for society. And I don't have any opinions on that, and I don't know what happens there. But I think software engineering, if I had kids going into software engineering, awesome. One of the questions I would be encouraging them to ask their professors and the schools they're choosing is, how are you thinking about this? Are you still just basically teaching kids to be good programmers, or are you thinking about at a concept level and a systems level and how to be a good engineer? Now, what's interesting there is I think most formal education in software engineering actually does align with that. It's been one of the sort of like biggest complaints about computer science education is that it's too removed from the practicalities of actually writing code and building software. And so that's why any kid off the street can teach themselves to program up to this point, and they can go and build software, but they may not understand the systems level and how to make this stuff really work and scale. And that's when you need a computer science degree to start thinking about that. So now we move to the world where it should properly align with those kind of concepts.
I know we're getting somewhat short on time, but another thing I'm curious about, if I can sneak another one in, is just as it gets easier and easier to build, what do you think the implications will be as an established startup as it relates to things like capital intensity, as it relates to things like competition and defensibility, as it relates to things like pricing pressure, margins, exit, I don't know, just whatever the things they need to think about to build a durable company, or at least to get a return for your investors? Is that all going to be changing wildly as well? And do you have any hypotheses there of where that's going to go?
I think for the majority of companies and spaces, I'd be really worried right now if I was an investor, for one, because I think you're just not going to need money. You're just not going to need as much money to get things done and to build really amazing things that solve problems, right? That's number one. I'm not a VC. I'm not in private equity. I'm not in any of that. So there's probably a lot more nuance and they have a lot more smart opinions about it. But I think like on the surface, that's one thing. The other thing that I would say is more than ever, and this is coming from the product guy, a career in product development and software, go-to-market matters more than anything else that you could ever invest in as a company. Your product development, your technology, none of that is really going to matter because everybody's going to be able to build great software that sees these solutions out there. What is going to matter is how you connect with customers, how you go to market, how you deliver value, how you think about your relationship. Like it all is going to come down to, oddly enough, the relationships you have with your market and how you are perceived. I think Rand is all of a sudden going to matter more than anything. Because if you think about for any given problem I've got, and I have this right now, there's a million AI tools out there, and you have no idea which one to pick to do the thing. This is also all of a sudden brand becomes the way that you pick, right? The brand that resonates with you and resonates with your peers and resonates with folks that you know. And so that's all go-to-market. That entire go-to-market engine is going to matter more than anything else. And that's what it's going to make you a successful company. If you don't have that, you're dead in the water. You will really struggle.
In closing, if any of your product peers are like, screw it, after listening to this episode, I'm inspired. It's time to break the ice. I need to figure out this whole AI thing. Speak to them specifically. What do you want them to internalize? If they have one takeaway from this discussion as they're heading out to break the ice, what do you want that to be?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I encourage folks that I'm talking to, younger folks, is go use these tools. Go down, if you're not already, go download Cursor and build something. Just do it. Find some goofy idea. Doesn't matter what it is. Just think of something you wish existed in the world, no matter how small or big, and go build it. You will learn an enormous amount by doing that. And you'll learn and you'll get better at the biggest part of what is happening now, it's going to get easier, but how to communicate with these tools and get value out of them. There is a nuanced approach. And so a lot of folks approach it and they'll do the throwaway request in the tool. Write me a sentence about an accident. It's garbage. And you're like, there's no context. You don't have any of that. But go and build with these tools. That's number one, I would say. And use the tools that are out there and find a way to consume the fire hose in a way that works for you. So that's been a big thing for me. I'm spending a lot of time watching what's going on and not jumping on too many things, watching the patterns at a high level, reading a lot of headlines, not going too deep into the articles unless it looks really interesting. And you start to see patterns and you start to see development. You see these interesting tools out there, but you have to have that be as part of your life as a product leader right now so you can understand what's possible and changing. Those are the big things.
Thanks, Jeremy. We cover a lot of ground. Is there anything I didn't ask that you wish I did?
I don't know, man. We covered a bunch. I probably said some things that are dumb and I shouldn't have, but that's okay.
We all do. But I
all.
learned a lot, and that's usually a pretty good barometer. If I learned a lot, then it probably means that
Nice.
at least some subset of listeners will as well, and that's what it's all about. So thanks for coming on. Best of luck in the new role and in the new world. And excited to stay in contact as you continue to get deeper, and as I do. So thanks again. Nice to catch up as well.
We go forth into the approach, right? All right, man. See ya.
See you, dude.
Thank you for tuning in to The Next. If you enjoyed it, you can subscribe from your favorite podcast player. In addition to the podcast, which typically publishes weekly, there's also a weekly newsletter on Substack at thenextnext.substack.com. That's essentially for weekly accountability of the ground I'm covering, areas I'm tackling next, and where I could use some help as well. And it's a great area to foster discussion and dialogue around the topics that we cover on the show. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.